Hello everyone, my name is Erin, and I'm the designer of the 2016 to 2017 Block of the Month. This is the April 2017 Block of the Month, and it is called the Pinball Swirl. And it looks like this. And it's made using foundation paper piecing. Now, what is exactly foundation paper piecing? It's a method used to stabilize pieces of fabric that are stitched together, and it's often used to create precise blocks with sharp points and perfectly matched intersections. Now, what kind of supplies do you need for paper piecing? Well, you'll need paper, you'll need templates, you'll need a sewing machine, an iron and ironing surface, and a clear ruler and rotary cutter. Now, what kind of paper should you use? Well, there's a few choices that you can choose from. The first is lightweight vellum, next is a specialty foundation paper, and the third is regular copy paper. Using vellum, well, it's easy to see through for fabric placement, and it's light and easy to sew. However, it can be quite expensive. I was able to find some pricing in US dollars, and for 30 sheets of the vellum paper that you see here, it was nearly $12, so that's quite expensive. The foundation paper that you see here, Carol Doak's foundation paper, it's a well-known brand. It's lightweight, absorbent, so you could put it through your printer. It's non-coated, and it's a little more affordable. You can see it's about $13 for 100 sheets. But an option that you probably have at home, which you can also use, is just copy paper. And a pros for that is that it's readily available, it's relatively inexpensive, and it's easy to tear as long as you use a short stitch length. And you probably already have some. So the paper piecing template that you're going to use is usually provided in your pattern. It always includes a seam allowance, and it may have 1, 2, or more parts to form your block, and be sure to print as many copies as your pattern tells you to. So this is the pattern for this is the template for the Pinball Swirl, and you'll see that there's a small square down at the bottom. That square is there to ensure that when you print your block, it prints out to the correct size. When you print it, make sure that it measures 1 inch square. And so I would suggest print 1 copy first, make sure that that square is the right size, and then continue printing however many templates you'd like to have. To set up your sewing machine, you're going to want to use a sewing machine foot with high visibility, and then you're going to want to set your stitch length to a much shorter stitch length, so 1.5 millimeters. And here are a few golden rules for paper piecing to keep in mind. The first is that all fabric is placed on the unprinted side of the paper. The only fabric that is placed right side up on the unprinted side of the paper is the first piece of fabric for each template. All subsequent fabric is placed wrong side up. Always use a light source to check your fabric placement. If you're not sure that the placement is correct, hold your fabric at the seam line you're about to sew on and flip it over to make sure you're going to cover the correct portion of the template. Make sure that you set every seam with a hot, dry iron after you trim the excess seam allowance. So, here we go. Cutting instructions for this block. So fabric 1, it's a yellow floral, that's what I have in the center of the block. You're going to need 4 2 by 3 inch rectangles. And you'll see that after all of these things that you need to cut, there is a label for it. So this one is D6. And what these numbers and letters are is showing you what section of the template it corresponds to. I would recommend that when you cut all your fabric out, once you've, cut all of this yellow floral, you're going to want to either pin it, or I like to use those little clover wonder clips, I think they're called. And I take a piece of scrap paper, I write the label on it, so I would put D6, and then I would wonder clip all of that together. Those wonder clips are pretty handy to keep things together. So we're going to move on to the navy sparkle. It's 4 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares. That goes to D2. You're You're going to need 4 3.5 by 3.5 inch squares. Label that E5. 4 2.5 by 3 3/4 inch rectangles. Label that D5. 4 5.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. Label that E2. Next, from fabric 3, which is a gray gem, you're going to need 4 2.5 inch squares. Label that E1. You're going to need 4 5.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. Label those D1. From fabric 4, which I'm using white for my background fabric, you're going to need 8 4 by 5 3/4 inch rectangles. Label 4 of those D3 and 4 of those E3. And then from fabric 5, which I'm using pink, you're going to need 8 4 3/4 by 4 3/4 inch squares. And again, 4 of those are D4 and 4 of those are E4. Now that everything is, all your fabric is cut out, you're going to take all of the templates that you printed out and you're going to just rough cut them out. So separate the 2 triangles of each square together. You're going to separate those. And one thing that I found was really helpful was labeling the sections with the color of the fabric. So you'll see that like D3 I have a W on, and that's for white. And D1 I wrote gem. That's for the gray gem fabric. And so it was just a nice, easy way for me to remember what goes where. I've also seen somebody use like a colored pencil of the fabric. So say you're using solids, you can use just a little swatch of that color from the colored pencil to mark your template to easily see what goes where. So you're going to start with the first 2 fabrics. So I'm using the E template, and the E1 is the gem fabric. I have that face up on the wrong side of my paper. And then I take the E2 fabric, which is that gray gem fabric, and I'm going to place that face down on the wrong side of my fabric, or wrong side of my template. You'll see that I've pinned them here just to kind of keep them in place so I can show you. You can feel free to use a pin to keep things organized and together to take it over to the sewing machine, but I find I've been doing this a few times, so I'm comfortable with just picking it up and taking it over to my sewing machine, but feel free to secure it in any way that you'd like. So once it's all ready to go, you're going to sew directly on the line. So do you see the line between the E1 and the E2 parts of the template? You're going to sew on that, and then once that's sewn, you're going to fold back the paper, trim anything that's more than 1/4 inch, and then once it's trimmed like that, you're going to flip the fabric open and press it. You're going to follow that same process of sewing, trimming, and pressing, and you're going to completely cover both of the templates. And I know it doesn't really look like a template, the template that you see when you print it out, but just be patient. Because in the next step, you're going to flip it over so the lined portion of the template is facing up, and you're going to trim any paper and fabric that's over 1/4 inch away from that dark solid line away. And so basically you're having your seam allowance, and you're going to cut off anything that's over the seam allowance. And you'll see that once you trim it, you have something that looks a little bit more like what you printed out. So once those trim blocks are trimmed, you will then sew them together along that long angled edge. And because we have a fair amount of portions that need to, or a fair amount of points that need to line up, I suggest using either pins or clips. I find Wonder Clips work a lot better. You're going to align the template where the points that need to meet are. So you'll see I have 2 clips here where I want to make sure that those points meet up. I'm going to lengthen the stitch length on my sewing machine to a long basting stitch, and I'm just going to baste the portion of the template that I want to ensure that has a good meeting point. Once you're happy with your alignments, you're going to sew along the entire seam using your short stitch length, and then you're going to press it open and you're going to create 4 quadrants. Now I do have to make a note that when you press these open, ensure you press the seams open as well, because otherwise you'll have a lot of bulk if you decide to press to one side or the other. So once you have the 4 quadrants here, you're just going to treat it like a 4 patch, and you're going to follow the same process of pinning or using clips to ensure the intersections look good, the points look good, baste, and then if you're pleased with the placement, sew the entire length of the seam using a short stitch length. And press your seams open, and then you're going to repeat the process to sew the rows together. So ensure that the points that you like are perfect by basting. Shorten your stitch length, sew the entire seam, and then press your seams completely open. And you are done with the block. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Our website is www.ipscork.com, and our email address is corkips@gmail.com. And stay tuned for the next block of the month.